Welcome to Curiosity, a podcast discussing Christianity for the merely curious. I'm Trevor Cook, and today's episode is a little special. We'll be steering away from the ecumenical councils to answer some questions about seminary and the different paths one can take in pursuing some of the highest levels of education and training within Christian academia. I am joined by three very close friends of mine who I originally encountered on our trip together in undergrad, and when we were going on a study abroad trip to St. Andrews, Scotland. Now they are each a year and a half into their respective seminary programs, and I think we'll start by just going around, and as I introduce you, you can respond with a quick rundown of what program you were in and why you chose that institution in particular. First of all, Andrew Bass.
Hey, Trevor. Thanks again for that swell introduction. Those are tall order to fall, the highest level of training. Swell introduction. Those are tall order to fall, the highest level of training. I appreciate that. I feel smarter just hearing that. So yeah, I am at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. I came in for the MDiv program, but some circumstances that led me into the Anglican Church had me decide to make two decisions. I decided, one, that I wanted to stay at Southeastern and get a degree here, but two, I decided to get out of the MDiv program and get into the MA in Christian Studies, which I got a bunch of extra classes tapped onto that because of my year in the MDiv, but I am very excited. I love Southeastern, and I don't regret sticking around.
Sure. Who you might hear us refer to Andrew Bass as Bass and Andrew Hollinger as Hollinger during this episode, just for sake of clarity. Andrew Hollinger, please tell us about your program and kind of what led you to the track that you're on.
Yeah, so my name's Andrew Hollinger. I am a postulant in the Episcopal Diocese of Fort Worth in Texas. And what that means is in the Anglican world, we have a little bit more complicated path to ordained ministry. But what postulant means is just the bishop said, he gave me the thumbs up, and now I'm in seminary. But I'm at Nashotah House Theological Seminary in Nashotah, Wisconsin. It's kind of a mouthful. Let's see. I'm in the MDiv program, the residential MDiv program, and I chose this institution because, the short of it is that it's the only place that my diocese sends people, so it was a no-brainer. But what I really appreciate about the program is it's modeled after a Benedictine style house, and so we are in prayer twice a day. We have 2 chapels every single day of the work week, and it's a high church seminary, so we have all of the smells and bells and the cassocks and the surplices. And if you don't know what that means, I encourage you to learn. And if you don't want to, then I bless you. But it's a life of prayer, a life of study, and a life of devotion. And that's what I really appreciate about my program.
Excellent. Lise, we have Noah Dellinger.
Yeah, I'm Noah Dellinger. I am a Master's of Divinity student at Duke Divinity School in North Carolina. The Master's of Divinity here at Duke is a 3-year program. I'm part of the Baptist House of Studies at Duke. I'm an ordained Baptist minister, kind of in contrast to the Anglican tradition. It's a little bit easier to get ordained as a Baptist. They just kind of threw some hands on me and sent me out. But I chose Duke Divinity because it's an interdenominational seminary. So there are people of different denominations. There's Catholics, there's Anglicans, Episcopalians, Methodists, Free Church folk, and whatnot. And so it's a good way to not only get a sense of what these other people are believing and where they're coming from, but a sense of how we are going to move along together into unity, and what kinds of unity we're looking for. And I also chose Duke because I'm considering continuing in doctoral work, and Duke is a good place to get connected to faculty who are doing some really good scholarship, but also who care about the role of that scholarship in the church and the responsibility that they have to the church. So,
All right. Well, thank you all for the introductions you've given, because it really highlighted everything I hoped it would, because this is an amazing panel of seminarians to have on a podcast to talk about what seminary is like. Between a high church MDiv, a Anglican at a Baptist seminary, getting a master's at Duke University. We got a really interesting mix here, and I think the best place to start out the discussion is just a conversation between y'all about how each of your respective programs kind of balances the academic and like the practice side of theology, both like being a pastor and being someone who is so like receiving, a very high level education. How exactly do you handle that in your program, and how does that differ between y'all? I'll pass it off to Bass first, because
I'll take it because I kind of mulled over the question of why I chose Southeastern, and it's not for any negative reason. I really just wasn't thinking when you asked, but I chose Southeastern for a few reasons, and one being that I was ready on the East Coast, and so I wanted that experience. But educationally, practically, the reason I chose Southeastern is because of their commitment to mission in the church. The Southern Baptist Convention is the largest mission sending agency in the world, and Southeastern is the missional seminary of the 6 Southern Baptist seminaries, so it is just all mission. They call themselves the Great Commission Seminary, as I've experienced it now, coming from a different tradition. I like to think of them as the Mere Christianity Seminary. They are really just great. The focus, every class, even a Greek class, if you could imagine it, finds a way to connect it to evangelism. And so just their commitment, imagine it, finds a way to connect it to evangelism. And so just their commitment to things that I care about. I'm very into missiology, both as academic discipline, but also just practically, and their views and practices and missiology and enculturation and just stuff of that nature is really something great to be a part of. And so, yeah, I I do love Southeastern, and there's a reason I chose to go there, and there's a reason I chose to stay there, even when I left the Southern Baptist tradition. I think I might have gotten off from your question, Trevor. What was it about the distinct seminary life?
I was asking about how the balance of the academic and the practical kind of comes into play in each of your respective practicing ministers, Noah, and then some of you are focused on becoming practicing ministers. So how exactly is that part of your education, and how does it differ between your respective institutes? Which I'd love to start with probably the most practice-oriented Neshota House postulate.
Yes. Yeah, so little history lesson, all right? I'm an Anglican, and this is our whole thing. So Neshota House was founded just 3 years before Baylor was, that great institution. by James
old.
Lloyd Breck. Yeah, by James Lloyd Breck, William Adams,
1845.
John Henry Hobart Jr. At the bidding of Bishop Jackson Kemper. And these guys were missionaries, actually. During the Western expansion, the Episcopal Church on the East Coast was they realized a need for priests in the growing America, and they sent these guys out. And then they settled in Wisconsin. They started the seminary, and they've been here ever since. So, and what's unique about my experience is that it's not like anyone else's seminary experience, right? Most seminaries, at least what I have in my mind, is you take classes 2 or 3 times a week, but you're in a church doing ministry while you're going. But in Shota House, there is some of that, but this tradition of, and I mentioned this in the Nicaea 1 podcast, that we have a Benedictine style life. Because for Nashotah House, and I believe this as well, that if you're going to be a priest, then rhythms of life that you cultivate, right? And what this means is a life of prayer, a life of study, and a life of service. And so our life of prayer is, we say morning prayer and evening prayer every single day as a community. And this is a really beautiful way of living together, of believing together, doing the Christian life together. With a student body of 40 residential students, it can get kind of monotonous, but it's preparing you for what true Christian community really looks like. Really pouring into one another, looking at someone across from you every single day and praying together. And that's just such a beautiful and profound, something that we don't get today in our multimedia, high fast-paced society we live in. Our multimedia, high fast-paced society we live in. It's kind of jarring, and it kind of forces you to take a step back and breathe and realize this is how at least Anglicans have been praying together, living together, doing study together for hundreds of years. And that's just really interesting. So a day in a life would be morning prayer, classes all morning, with community, breakfast and lunch. And then, per the Benedictine spirit, we have a work crew once a week. And then we do study or various ministry opportunities we have. And then we end the day together with evening prayer or evensong. And then we go back home to our families. So...
Yeah, I could hear Noah scratching his neck and being like, "You guys pray in the morning? You all like pray at night too? That sounds like such good community." Tell us a little bit about your experience, Noah, at Duke, and kind of how the practice kind of fits into your lifestyle, along with the academic, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty big contrast in terms of like a daily liturgical rhythm, because we don't have a unified tradition at Duke. So the Anglican Episcopal House does do morning prayer together. They do Tuesday evening Eucharist together, and you can kind of like opt in to do that too. They're open to non-Episcopal, non-Anglican people, and other houses have their own things, but for the most part it's really up to you to live in a weird place, going to church and being invested in a church, which and then there are other people who are doing all the works, and their academic study is very integrated into their life in a congregation or a parish. So it kind of varies, For the most part, like, it's up to the student at Duke to either come in with those habits, or be very convicted about finding people who will support that. And I have found friends and classmates who support that. Personally, we have chapel 3 times a week at the Divinity School. There's also the Duke Catholic Center has daily mass at the Duke Chapel right next to the Divinity School. And so I've been going to that, and obviously not partaking in the Eucharist, but that's becoming part of my daily rhythm. But also in the past, I've had daily prayer with friends during lunch breaks and after class. So it's certainly not built into the DNA of your time at Duke, but it's available there if you want it. So there's pros and cons to that.
Thanks, Noah.
Yeah.
Finally, Andrew Bass kind of in the middle of the two worlds.
Yeah, and I would say that that's a great way to describe it at Southeastern. It really is in the middle, and I think much like Noah's experience, it's up to you. There's really not much holding you accountable. They've got chapel twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Southeastern, being in the Southern Baptist tradition, you know, there is an understanding that a lot, if not a majority, of the seminary students are already serving in churches, if not on paid staff or ordained at the church already. And so that's the case for me, being a youth leader, and I live actually about an hour from campus now. And so they have those things. They've got all their stuff going on campus, but it really is, Southeastern really encourages getting involved in the local church. And so one thing that they say even at orientation is that, you know, chapel doesn't replace your church, and your homework assignments don't replace your personal devotion and quiet time with God. So there might be less available than you would think for the seminary students to really get spiritually connected at Southeastern. I'm sure they have some great resources that I'm just missing. So if someone's listening now and is like pulling their hair out, sorry. I should probably spend more time on campus. But yeah, outside of that, they have resources for developing spiritual life, but outside of chapel, they really promote getting involved in the local church and allowing them to be part of your spiritual formation.
That was great, Andrew. Now, just out to all y'all again, what is classwork like? Is it different from what undergrad was? And we'll start with Noah this time.
Yeah. The classwork at Duke Divinity varies greatly in terms of the discipline. There are ethics classes, theology classes, and practical pastoral ministry classes. The majority of classes, specifically Old Testament. And so, thankfully, I've gotten to take some doctoral seminars in the Old Testament and getting into Hebrew. Right now I'm in a class on the Song of Songs that's in the graduate program in religion, so it's part of like the PhD program rather than with the Divinity School. I'm also in a Isaiah class in the Divinity School that's kind of like maybe a complementary class to that, in that we're taking the lectionary passages from Isaiah and translating them and thinking together how reading the Hebrew and getting in the text that deeply gives us cues about how to preach this when they come around on the lectionary. So I think there's a level of depth available in terms of biblical studies and in terms of theology that the faculty provides at Duke. And there's a wide range, but I can really only speak of the biblical studies, specifically the Old Testament faculty. The faculty here at Duke are incredible at the Old Testament department. So,
I have to ask, because you mentioned several classes there, Noah. How many classes in total are you taking?
I'm taking 4 right now. I'm taking the Song of Songs class, Isaiah, Modern Biblical Interpretation, and my second semester of Greek because I slacked on taking that in undergrad.
Oh, okay. Which is funny because I know you were like teaching Hebrew in undergrad, so you
Yeah,
got those different priorities, I guess.
it was my priority, yeah, and so now I finally got around to Greek.
All right, Hollinger.
Yeah, so my class schedule. So Nashotah House is unlike Duke, not attached to a university, and so we don't have those opportunities to take doctoral level seminars, which, you know, depending on your personality, you might not want to, but our main focus is to make a well-rounded priest, right? And so we don't really have the option to specialize in one thing or another because, again, the emphasis is on making a well-rounded priest, right? When you're in a parish, it doesn't really matter if you're an expert in one subject. It matters that you can hold your own in everything. And so we have a full course pastoral ministry and liturgical training, both in class and every semester in the chapel. And so our classes are very good. We have to write papers, pretty standard. And so it's not unlike undergrad. I was a humanities major, and so I feel very at home here. But I have friends. There's a classmate of mine in his 50s, and he was a biology PhD and felt the call to ministry, and now he's here and he's doing great too. So it's very approachable in that sense. But really, what's unique about Nashotah House is that, in addition to we also have ascetical theology round, which is also Christian spirituality. We also have ascetical theology round, which is also Christian spirituality. I forgot that earlier. What's unique about Nashotah House is that your liturgical training is more or less also treated as a class, right? Because in the Anglican tradition, you have to know how to say Mass, how to say morning, evening prayer, how to instruct everyone in the service to do their particular roles. And so we get really deep and invested training in that as well. So
it's really interesting. I like the way you describe it as everything's focused around the well-rounded priest. So
Definitely.
You're not skimping out on any specific subject. It sounds like a technical institute almost.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is. I mean, the MDiv was originally designed to be a professional degree.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. Thanks, Hollinger.
Yeah.
Bass, tell us about what classes are like or how they differ from undergrad at Southeastern.
Yeah, so I think the main difference between undergrad, I was also a humanities major. I think all three of us studied religion. Well, Hollinger was great text, right? But
I was a religion minor.
Okay, yeah. So we were all in the same realm, reading the same old stuff.
Some could say that you studied the good text, and Hollinger studied the great text.
Yeah. So we all had training in theological writing, and Baylor's a fantastic place to do that. And just like Andrew said, not everyone at seminary has that luxury. Middle-aged or older, or studied like business or biology and have never written a 12-page paper in their life and have never heard of Turabian style.
They're the best of us.
Yeah, yeah, they are the best of us. And I think I'm sure that they have a big curve to get over, but just like Andrew said, in my experience with those people, their hearts are on fire. Even if they hate school, they seem to excel and do really well at it. I think that, yeah, the experience at Southeastern is not that it's easier, but just that the approach is different. There is this understanding that you are educating the student to form them into something, not educating them to create a scholar. And so even maybe in ways that you wouldn't notice, there's just a difference in how that's approached. Like, for instance, one big thing that's a thing around here is never let your education interfere with your ministry or your family negatively. So they will openly tell you, if you're serving in a church or you've got a wife and a baby at home, and the difference between an A and a B is going to be neglecting your ministry or your family, take the B every single time. Which is something that I never heard in undergrad.
Me neither. That's a really good outlook to have, and kind of leads into what my next question is. How do you balance it all, honestly, between school, and I'm wondering if all three of you work. I know several of you do and have like other commitments as well. I'm sure everyone attends and participates in a church as well. How do you balance it all? Do you still have free time to do other fun things? And, and actually, if you could throw it in there, like, how many hours a week do you think you spend reading?
Oof.
I'll let you start out, Bass.
Well, I am really blessed in all meanings of that word, where the parish that I work for, I basically have as much time as I need to spend doing schoolwork. I do a lot of lecture watching and reading at work. Of course, it doesn't that's not what I go to work to do, but I just have a lot of freedom by nature of my job to work on school if I've got the time to do it during the workday. So I don't know. Yeah, there's no way I'd be able to handle a full-time job where I didn't have time to do that. No way I'd be able to handle a full-time job where I didn't have time to do that. At least not as poor as my time management skills are. But yeah, I don't know. I read a lot, no less than, I don't know, 4-5 hours a week. It's not incredible amounts. Like, it doesn't just overtake you, but it's a lot. I mean, you spend a lot of time just sitting down reading books, a few hundred pages a week.
All right. What about you, Noah?
Well, first off, in terms of balance, I just got to say, like, the Baptist House here at Duke has given me a lot of financial resources that have treated me very, very well. And echoing what Bass said, I'm very blessed. It's not a normal situation, but I don't have to treat this as like a side gig. It can kind of be my full-time job being a student. So I do work. I work at the Divinity School at the library, but what that means is I sit at the desk and my work time can kind of be my study time. So on top of, between like scholarships and that bit of income through the library, I'm taken care of for life expenses, and again, that's just a blessing, and I can only thank the people at the Baptist House for helping me out with that. I'm typically on campus. I treat it like a work day, maybe even longer. I'm typically on campus from like 8 to 6, Monday through Thursday, and then on Fridays I'm on campus around that same time, maybe a few hours shorter. And during that time, other than lunch breaks and going to class, I'm pretty much in the books reading. So it's a lot of reading, like Andrew said. Some of it's just reading you kind of got to get through. A lot of it's like you get a lot of reading assigned and you got to figure out how to read strategically. Got to figure out how to decide what you're going to read all of and in depth and what you're going to scan through and get the idea of. And then on top of that, you got to balance other things that you want. And almost even more importantly, you got to just let things sit a little bit and actually reflect on things and let them digest in your soul and in your mind, and try and find ways to write that are not related to essays and related to school, but just writing in the same way that you're sowing seeds into the ground, because that writing will pay dividends later in the ministry.
I feel like I could listen to those last few sentences from you, Noah, on repeat, like as I sleep, to become a better student, you know?
Yeah.
Hollinger, you want to tell us about how you handle your time?
Yeah, so I'm very blessed in two ways, two very huge ways. That my undergrad degree being great texts, minoring in religion and Greek, I essentially got a seminary education. And reading in seminary, I've either already read or have a general understanding of what is in them. So I get to selectively read, like Noah was saying, a little bit easier than some other people do. And that's to say that in our very measured life, I probably read for every afternoon during the workday, and then sometimes on the weekends, because we have that dedicated time built into our schedule. And so we're on as a seminarian for 7:45 in the morning until evensong or morning prayer, evening prayer ends around 5 or 5:30, and then we get to come home to our families, because many of us do have family. Morning prayer, evening prayer ends around 5 or 5:30, and then we get to come home to our families, because many of us do have families here. And that leads me into the second point where I'm very blessed, which kind of a cop-out answer for anyone listening. I'm married, and my wife has a great job, and so I don't have to work at all, which is a huge blessing. And my diocese supports me. Other people support me from churches and from my family, and so I'm very blessed to have that freedom to do that. But in the Shota House, there are a few on-campus opportunities to work, but due to the nature of the life here, you're actually not supposed to have an outside job. You're supposed to dedicate 100% of your time to study and prayer while you're here for 3 years. So
that's awesome. And shout out to Elizabeth.
Yeah, definitely.
Shout out to Elizabeth.
All right, we're gonna do a lightning round with some of the more burning questions that I think everyone has to ask. I mean, I'm not in the higher ed system myself, but I'm working in it, so I know that everyone wants to know about financial aid and application process and stuff. So I'm just gonna fire a question, and you guys jump in as you will. So, when should someone consider seminary, and what does the application process look like?
Whenever you feel a call from God.
I think amen to that.
And talk with your local, talk with your pastor or your priest or your leaders, and they will help you with the discernment period. And the application process is like any other application process, except for it's going to be more stories and your about your specific calling. So yeah, be prepared for that. They are going to ask you about your calling, and your vocational plans, but don't do it in a vacuum.
Don't do it in a vacuum.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah.
There are lots of forces weighing on us, telling us we want to do things, but the only way that you're going to be successful in ministry and be successful in your discernment is if you do it in a community.
All right. Is financial aid available? Are sponsorships, or is pastoral loan debt a growing crisis in America?
I want to answer this one. Don't change denominations halfway through seminary. Most seminaries are affiliated with a tradition, and if you do your planning right, you can many times go for free.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there. I'm not saying it never is. I mean, that's a really privileged thing to say, but it's not as big a scary monster as it might be in some other academic disciplines, at least in my experience.
I can only speak about Duke, but I know that each house of study and also just Duke Divinity in general, they have specific offices that are geared for advocating for you. Even before you come here, they're more than willing to talk to the applicants or possible applicants about what financial aid is going to look like. And yeah, there's a lot of resources. The ministry world is connected and connected to people who are, the silent saints who you're never going to hear about, you're never going to think about, but they're giving their resources humbly and generously. So,
yeah. And I can say for Nashotah House, so we just had a restructuring of our student aid deal. And
the silent saints who you're never going to hear about, you're never going to think about, but they're giving their resources humbly and generously. So,
yeah. And I can say for Nashotah House, so we just had a restructuring of our student aid deal, and there's tons of opportunities, but the pastoral loan debt crisis is real, because if you're thinking about going to seminary and you're taking out $60,000-$80,000 loans, it's going to be really hard to pay those off with what the average paycheck for a pastor is these days. That's kind of
not in it.
Yeah,
not
that's
in it for the money.
Right. You're not in it for the money, but you should also be cautious about the way that you steward your finances.
Can't ignore
because
that undergrad still came first, and
if
wise spiritually, especially if you have a family, to
right.
get wide-eyed, go $50,000 in debt for a $40,000 salary.
Right.
And finally, where does the path lead afterward? Are there other careers that you can have in things other than preaching or teaching? You guys are all just going to say no.
There are. I mean, there's nonprofit ministry, there's parachurch ministry, beyond like parish or congregational ministry. A lot of divinity schools nowadays or seminaries are offering dual degrees with like Masters of Social Work, Public Policy. Duke's program has one that you can be like a Juris Doctor. So you can go into different fields within MDiv, but also just different pockets of the church, specifically in America. Like there are different resources that are becoming available for the laity that are not pastoral roles, but through teaching. So like the Bible Project and other biblical resources like that. Those things are organizations are becoming more and more prominent, and they're going to need more people who have these kinds of experiences and backgrounds in education.
Hollinger, Bass, you guys got anything to add on to that, or did Noah pretty much cover it?
Yeah, pretty much. Personally, in the Anglican world, we have things called curacies, which is kind of like a med school residency. So for me personally, that's going to be next. If I get ordained, God willing, church assenting. But really teaching was my backup plan. So I don't have an answer for your question there.
Chaplaincy. I forgot about that. Chaplaincy is
preaching,
a big one too.
teaching, and podcasting, right?
Exactly.
Bass, anything?
No, yeah, I think that summarizes it. There's, if you can think of it, there's a vocational ministry for it, and seminary helps. It informs. It's good.
That's great. All right, and I guess that'll be it for tonight. I just wanted the last thing from all y'all to be what the best part of your time in seminary has been so far. We'll start with Andy Bass.
All right. Yeah, I would say the relationships by far with professors and with friends. One thing that I don't know if we've mentioned explicitly, but I know that we all share it in the seminaries, at least the ones we go to. are teaching it is you have to prioritize your relationship with Christ and your own personal devotion with Christ and your own personal devotion. Even though you're being assigned tons of books of the Bible to read, really try and take some time, even if it's just a few minutes a day, to just pray passages, read over scripture, and pray. Just sit down in prayer. If you're not doing that, you are not going to get much use out of your seminary experience. You're going to get a lot of education, and you're going to be devoid of spiritual formation. And it's hard. Seminary is hard. Balancing it with life is hard. If you're not grounded in your faith and working towards that every day, you're going to be a crummy seminary student, and you're going to be bitter.
Yeah. I to add on to that, I know this isn't related to the question, but it's not just, being someone who's always been consistent in their quiet time and is like always maintain the discipline. It's more about when you get broken and the Lord breaks you, are you resilient? And have you had the experience of becoming spiritually resilient to maintain those disciplines throughout that spiritual backbreaking? Because there's plenty of that happens in seminary. So I think
definitely.
the best thing about my seminary experience related to Andrew is just friendships. But since he already said that, I'll also say just in my time at Duke, I've fallen more in love with the Word of God, with Scripture, and become more confident that it's the most beautiful thing. It's the most weird, ridiculous, and truthful thing that we have on the planet. So
That's great. Yeah, I guess my relating to what we were talking about earlier. I don't mean to take the pious cop out, but the Shota House teaches you to be spiritually resilient, and that's something coming out of undergrad I did not have, and that's something that really why I came here, and I really appreciate having that opportunity. So yeah.
praise God.
All right. Yeah, praise God. Hey, thank you all again for being on here, and absolutely fantastic time hearing about your experiences and learning more about seminary, and I hope our listeners enjoyed it as well. But with that, I think we'll go ahead and conclude here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks
for having us.
Thanks for listening. To find more resources to satisfy your curiosity, go to Miriosity.com and read more about topics that we discussed today. And if you're a Miriosity supporter or have rated the podcast on whatever platform you listen to, we thank you for helping us produce this show. In this episode, we featured Andrew Bass, Andrew Hollinger, and Noah Dellinger. This podcast is produced by Miriosity, music by Saint Zero.